On this episode of The Table of Content, Albert and I take a stroll with two poets and test the limits of preconceptions as we talk about the short story Two Poets, written by We Are One Body Audio Theater volunteer and contributing author Kelsey McIntyre. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the Table of Content. I'm your host, Michael, and I'm joined with my co-host, Albert. How are you doing, Albert?
Great. Glad to be here as always.
Wonderful. And so today we're talking about the short story Two Poets, written by one of the volunteer authors, Kelsey McIntyre. And so I know that both you and I have read it, we've heard it, we've listened to it. And if you'd like to listen to the story before we get into our conversation, so as to not, spoil it for you, please feel free to visit the Audio Theater website and you can listen to it there. But other than that, why don't we just dive right into unpacking some of the elements of this story? So, Albert, was there anything that initial takeaways or any points that resonated with you from the get-go?
Well, I want to say this. There's a few versions kind of floating out there on the website, and I had the opportunity to work on the multicast version, which was Dennis Jers, Joe Potts, and myself as a bonus character, which we'll get into. And then I added some sound effects to it. So it was a lot of fun to sort of listen to it again because we recorded this several years back, and then to sort of bring it back and bring some life to it was a lot of fun. So my point was actually not so much the content, but just that, I really enjoyed Dennis and I liked Joe a lot, and it was fun to sort of put this story together and give it some extra life. That being said, I think I enjoy any story that sort of starts in nature, because that's what they're doing. They're taking a walk. Mr. Fitzsimmons and Mr. Witherwill, they're sort of taking this stroll, and it's peaceful and sounds beautiful. And the reason it stuck out to me is because I'm always in search of some peaceful environment, some place to sort of release myself from my daily sort of woes, if you will. So I was like, oh, great, a story in a forest, on a trail, and, fresh air. So it's nothing really deep there, but definitely enjoy a story that starts off that way.
Right. We have that sort of universal experience of, I'm sure everyone has taken a pleasant stroll somewhere in a shaded wood or grove somewhere. And it just captures that experience right away. It helps you enter right into it. And what a great name. When I first was reading the script, I actually haven't listened to your production, so I'm looking forward to listening to it soon. But Witherwill, what a great name. At first I thought, oh, like someone, who has sort of like withered will, like weak willpower. That was my first thought. And then I thought, oh no, maybe it's more like whither will you go? Like Witherwill, Mr. Witherwill.
Right.
That's such a great name. And then for the other poet, Mr. Fitzjames.
Oh, Fitzjames, I'm sorry. Yeah, I said Fitzsimmons. It's Fitzjames. So thank you for that correction.
Oh, no problem. The only reason I mentioned that is because the first thing that I thought of was pajamas afterwards, because I'm very visual when I look at words, and there's a similarity in the way the word looks if you skim over it quickly. It Fitzjames, pajamas.
Mr. Pajamas. I mean, Mr. Fitzjames. Right.
So we have these two men of the word, so to speak, and they poets, and they go through a stroll through a beautiful wood as they seek inspiration. And so, it's really beautiful. And then what happens?
Well, so it turns into this sort of, mantra for nature and everything that's really wonderful. And, Mr. Witherwill is very sort of caught up in it all, right? From a very poetic standpoint. and just, these beautiful monologues about everything that's reminded, of him. And then Fitzjames, or Mr. Pajamas, whatever works for you, uh, Fitzjames is, sort of not quite as illustrious in his context. It's like, well, yeah, it's nice, and I think of, simple things. And Witherwill's just sort of disgusted with him, like, ugh, how are you a poet? So that's sort of the first main section, is you have two people who are sort of contradictory to each other, but one really overly so, really kind of critical, and then the other who is like, yeah, well, I mean, this is what I think about, and it feels like something that we kind of experience, right, in our daily lives. Someone is really intent, and it's like, you should be experiencing this, and then you're like, well, I don't. And you asked me what I felt. You asked me what I thought. You said, what do you think about? I said, well, this is what I think about. And it seems so interesting that in a world where, we're supposed to be, putting our fists down and saying, I want my freedom. I want to be able to say what I want to say. I want to have my speech. I want all of my rights protected. And okay, all right, great. So what do you have to say? Well, I believe this. What? What are you talking about? You're out of your mind. I was like, wait a second. This is I thought I could say what I wanted. Well, no, you can't. You have to say what I say. That'll be your freedom. So you see that kind of playing back here between the two poets. It's like, you should be seeing all the beauty that I see, and instead you see raspberry tarts. That's in the story. And it's like, but he says it like, well, I think of raspberry tarts, and
Right.
and he's just whatever. You don't get it. So I've never quite understood the concept of, well, it's my opinion. Why can't it be my opinion? And it's like, we're not entitled to our opinion anymore. It's like, unless it matches the opposing party's opinion, then, it's completely out of the question. Like, well, then it's not true freedom. This is not true freedom if we cannot truly express our opinions without being subjected to some sort of tyranny or bigotry or hatred or violence, as it were, just because I express my own opinion, which is contrary to yours.
Right. Or even condescension. Like Witherwill is so condescending towards Fitzjames, and I had that same thought. Like, here he is, Witherwill, seeking inspiration and reveling in sort of, or he says he's reveling in sort of this, the sensations that the stroll through the wood are evoking in him. And then when Fitzjames actually sort of questions it about that, he says, oh, I have thoughts too deep for words. And I thought to myself,
right.
Well, that's interesting, because, thoughts usually lead to words in one form or another. And I guess that's sort of the job of a poet, is to put those sensations and thoughts into words to help evoke that experience. But it's just interesting to see. Yeah, Witherwill is sort of, he's lofty, but it's almost like it's unfettered, or it's not tied or grounded in reality. He's sort of like up in the air, innocence when all was right with the world. And we'll see how that plays out in the future. And then Fitzjames, Fitzjames,
Mr. Pajamas.
Mr. Pajamas has that more practical approach. He's like, well, this is pleasant, and it makes me think of, these smells evoke the image of how I think it was his grandmother or someone made raspberry tarts for him. And so he says, so I suppose I was actually thinking of raspberry tarts, which is really kind of a practical, down to earth, almost like sort of commonsensical approach to reality. And yet it kind of makes you wonder, and you call yourself a poet, you're like, we have this idea of poetry or poets as trying to be flamboyant and to try to be over the top with their expressiveness and everything. And
sure.
And Fitzjames is very understated and mild mannered and very practical.
But you know what, you made me think of something. You made me think of something there. So, and let me be very clear. The great poets of centuries and millennia past, that have created some of the greatest poems, and their eloquence is unmatched. I mean, Dante's The Divine Comedy. It's a poem, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Odyssey, I believe that's a poem. Correct me. Is that right? The Odyssey is a poem?
Yes. Yeah, it's written in a type of meter. I can't remember what it was. If it was
okay, but
right.
So you have these basically sort of, they're stories, right? But written as poems. So let me not knock Dante or Homer or any of the great poets who have just such ability to really bring a poem to life. That being said, in the story you have Witherwill, right? That section, let me quote it there, that where you were talking about thoughts too deep for words. And he goes on to say, when I smell the rich perfume with which these trees have anointed themselves, I recollect the purity and innocence of childhood, that blissful time of life when we had not yet lost our unity with nature. And then Fitzjames is just, and I was thinking that sometimes, right, we think it has to be, what we say has to be full of big words, of eloquence, of things that people can't even comprehend without picking up the dictionary and figuring out what in the world people were saying when they used that particular word or phraseology. And Witherwill wants to sort of condemn Fitzjames for his lack of intensity in his, nature expression or what he's interpreting. And I was thinking from scripture, the concept of the two people who go into the temple to pray, and you have the one who's, forgive me for all the things that I've done. I've been good, and I've done this, and I've tithed, and I've prayed, and I've done all the things right. And he's next to him is the one, I think the tax collector, says, he gets down, doesn't raise his head, beats his chest, and it's like, forgive me, a poor sinner.
Mm-hmm.
And the question is, who is more kind of, who's closer to God in that instance? Who is more forgiven? Sometimes it's the simple, honest, pure act that is greater than the large, boisterous, full of vigor, full of, huge words, that is actually what's better. So in this case, in the story, we have a very simple poet within Fitzjames, and he's no less a poet, regardless of what Witherwill says. Maybe Witherwill is less of a poet than Fitzjames, for all we know. But Witherwill wants to stand on his big, soapbox of, this is what nature conjures for me, and Fitzjames wants to have a raspberry tart.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. So be it.
Right. Right.
So I couldn't help but sort of bring that out as you were talking and I was reading through that section.
Right. He delights in the order, purpose, and practical application of what nature provides. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. Fitzjames sees the beauty and delights in the goodness of the practical application of what nature provides. Nature provides tarts, or nature provides raspberries, and we can make raspberries into raspberry tart, which is a delightful thing. Whereas Witherwill, I think he's trying to be a pure poet in that sense. He's trying to go, like you were saying, to the big, deep, extravagant issues, talking about, before the fall, when we lived with harmony with nature, and I think he's striving for a higher level of experience of reality. But it's not to say that Fitzjames's experience is any less because of that. Like you were saying, Fitzjames is just, no, this is order, and I appreciate order and beauty and the practical application of things. And that's good in of itself. But it's interesting how Witherwill has this overabundance of exuberance and is trying to reach down to his friend's level and sort of raise him up. As you were talking, Albert, I got the thought, I wonder if Miss McIntyre modeled these two poets off of Plato and Aristotle, because that's sort of the classic understanding of Plato and Aristotle. Is Plato is lofty and has all these high ideas and the world of intelligibility and subsistent forms, and Aristotle on the one hand is no, reality is as it is, and let's take that as our starting point. And there's that famous I think it's a mosaic in the Vatican museums by Raphael of the School of Athens, where you've got Plato's pointing up and then Aristotle's pointing down, talking about the origin of ideas. But anyways, I digress.
Well, we can take up sacred art on another show. How about that?
Sounds great. Right.
I think that's just kind of a constant struggle. And I think it goes back to the other point that I was making, right? So we object to each other's opinions, even though they're opinions, and we cannot fully accept two different kinds of the same thing. Like, I'm a poet, you're not a poet. But wait a second, I can write verse, So my poems are about raspberry tarts, so what? My poems are about pumpkin pie. So what? It's a poem,
Mm-hmm.
It could be, technically exactly a poem, it could be the perfect haiku, but if it's a poem, it's a poem. And if someone writes a lot of those pumpkin pie poems, then, they're a poet in their own right,
Mm-hmm.
So the thought that, I can't have my own opinion because it doesn't agree with you, and I can't be what I want to be as far as, I want to be a poet. I want to be a writer. I want to be a cook, but all I can cook is I cook great rice and chicken. Okay, well, you're a great cook of rice and chicken. Don't let anyone tell you can't be a great cook of rice and chicken. So it feels like we've so restricted our view of, being able to be something without someone saying like, no, and you can't say that, by the way, So I don't know what it'll take. Maybe it'll just be one of those constant sort of struggles that we go through, that people like, Fitzjames and Witherwill will just sort of exist. It sort of reminds me of some of the debaters, like the strong Christian debaters versus the atheists or the agnostics. Some of them are, they have really great friendships, but the difference there is, and I'm glad I said it, because some of those really good relationships, they respect each other. There's a respect there for the other side, and you kind of see it with Bishop Robert Baird and some of the discussions he has with opposing sides. Like, he doesn't condemn the other side.
No.
There's a respect. There's an understanding. There's a human on the other side that's having this debate with me, this conversation, and I've seen it from the other side as well, like respect for the Christians from the atheistic side, and that should be what we're striving for, like the ability to sort of exist, respect each other, say, okay, I'm going to listen to you. I have my belief. You have your belief, Now,
Right.
We won't turn this into a discussion of the truth of faith and the truth of Christian teaching. I just want to get the point across that we should be able to sort of at least respect each other in a way that we can communicate, because it just seems like Witherwill doesn't even want to talk to Fitzjames, in the story. He's just like, I'll forget it. You don't get it, Fitzjames. And be like, well, he does. You just don't want to talk to him. And Fitzjames is more than happy to talk to Witherwill. You can tell he's a very friendly fellow.
Yes.
So I wish that there was more sort of happy, peaceful, coexistence, just for the sake of, a more peaceful humanity and the sake of communication.
Mm-hmm. You're right. And that's a beautiful point that you bring out, Albert, about the sort of the culture, the current trend of culture. I think we've lost the art of civil disagreement or civil argument, and it just goes straight from, I hate you, so there,
Right.
I'm packing up my toys and I'm going home. Never want to see you again, or and like that's kind of beautiful in one sense, like you were saying. I feel like Witherwill is sort of like that. He's like incredulous, but he's still walking with Fitzjames. They're still having that sort of back and forth as they bounce around ideas. But then I think, like you were saying, Witherwill gets a little bit zealous and wants to prove his point, and that's where the story takes on a really wonderful turn, a humorous turn of events.
Let's move on to the last part here. So where are we headed in the story?
So Witherwill gives this beautiful speech about the innocence and beauty of nature when they hear rustle in the bushes, right? And then all of a sudden there's I believe it's a lion.
It's a wolf. It's a wolf.
Right. So they hear this rustle in the bushes, and a sleek gray wolf comes out. And interestingly enough, this is where it takes sort of on like a fairy tale character to the story, because the wolf starts to engage in the dialogue as well, and is siding with Witherwill. And so it's kind of has that element of, okay, well, we all know that wolves are predators, but then the wolf is, with eloquence of speech, siding with Witherwill and sort of playing into his game, but all the time, yeah. Anyways, maybe I should stop there and we can talk a little bit about that. But
it's a good intro for sort of us in our lives, right? We're all hyped up in something, and we see it. We finally see the great thing, where we see the sort of culmination of what we've wanted. And it's just, oh yes, finally, yes, this is fantastic and this is great. But sometimes, maybe many times, we're a little too exuberant, so much so that we get a little blinded. And I think that's what happens here. Witherwill is so excited to have this sort of magnificent feat happening before him, a wolf that's talking to him and is being as eloquent as he is, and expressing, nature in the kindest words, and sort of, siding against, Fitzjames, and sort of staring back at Fitzjames, be like, no, he doesn't get it. You're right, and I think we do that a lot. We just, hey, great, I finally reached the great point of what I wanted to prove. But in this instance, and I'm not saying it's always, I'm not saying that it always turns out to be something sour or something bad. Sometimes we reach the great point that we've wanted, and it's as great as it should be. But in this instance, it turns out that the wolf was very much a wolf as they are portrayed in any other story, and was just looking for an opportunity to lure out one of the unsuspecting poets for the sake of an easy meal. So we see here in the story that the wolf attempts to eat Witherwill, and he's trying to work it out, and one big whole bite. And as it was, very sort of sleekly and calmly, Fitzjames comes to the rescue and dislodges Witherwill from the wolf, who, and then they both kind of sit there, kind of stunned, the wolf and Witherwill. But I really love kind of how it ends with Fitzjames, and then we'll come back and kind of, I think, dig into this. Fitzjames says, "Careful, sir. The last thing my companion would want is for you to choke to death on a mouthful like that. He is so fond of animals."
What a great way to just tie it all together. Yeah, what a great ending line.
But here's kind of the point, right? So we get caught up in what we think is the greatest, the best, the most wonderful thing, and we commit ourselves completely to this ideal, to this action, and we forget about sort of the reality, right? We sort of we blind ourselves, because under normal circumstances, I don't think anyone is going to just walk up to a wolf and treat it like a puppy. People are going to be defensive because we're sort of trained to know the wolf is wild. The wolf is not safe. The wolf is not domesticated. The wolf could attack you. The wolf could hurt you. The wolf could cause bodily harm. You could lose your life. So to get to a point with something that we would normally say, this is dangerous, don't do that. Don't stick your hand in the fire, you're going to burn yourself. And then to be so blinded that we just sort of forget, and we sort of cross into the threshold of danger, and we risk our life, we risk even our soul, in a moral issue. And this is what's happened in the story. We've seen Witherwill cross that line because he's blinded by his grandeur of nature. So he's like, but it's a talking wolf, Why should I be afraid of a talking wolf? Well, because it's a wolf.
Right.
It's a wolf. It's not anything less than a wolf. And again, I don't want to say that there's not room for change in the world. Please, I want to say that things can change, but when we sort of just let down our guard and we just proceed without caution, this is what can happen. When we can be eaten by the wolf. And many times we are consumed by the wolf, and the wolf tries to devour us completely, and we're waiting for someone to save us.
Right.
And Fitzjames comes to the rescue and saves him, and in a very, cheeky way says, "Be careful, Sir Wolf, I don't want you to choke on my friend, he'd be really worried about you." But past the kind of sarcasm and cheekiness aside, that's what we need a lot of times. We need a Fitzjames in our life to come and jab the wolf to free us from what we did, because we were so caught up in our own world that we didn't see what we were doing.
Right. And that's the classic sort of struggle and understanding I think we have as humans with our relationship with nature. On one hand, nature gives us raspberries. On the other hand, nature has wolves. And like you were saying, not Fitzjames, but Witherwill was trying to see past that and get at the inkling that there's this disorder in nature, that things aren't as they should be in this state. He wanted to get at a more pure form of existence. But the fact of the matter is that form of existence doesn't exist at this point, not until maybe, put a theological spin on it, not until the new heavens and the new earth. But, things are, and things act according to their nature, and when you were talking about the wolf flattering him and just so that he could get a meal, I couldn't help but think of Little Red Riding Hood, and they're in a forest, and the wolf is like doing classic wolf, literary wolf actions. And so I found that really humorous, and what a great lesson to learn from it. Like you were saying, we all get caught up in that one thing, that one big idea that just polarizes all of our attentions and energies, and then we realize, oh well, it wasn't what we thought it was, or as you were also mentioning, it was downright dangerous. And I love the way how Fitzjames in the story is so consistent with his character. It's such a short story, but the character development is really great. He's very concerned with the practical, very calm. He's checking his walking stick to make sure that it didn't have any chips in it. I can just see him like kind of being more preoccupied with checking his walking stick, while at the same time just having saved his friend from certain death. And just like, oh, careful there, sir.
Right.
Just very even keeled. where I could see like the rest of the conversation somehow going about Witherwill just sort of like having existential, reflections on his life having just about ended, Anyways.
I was trying to sort of generalize because the wolf can be any number of things. Yes, okay, the wolf, we can obviously just easily say the wolf is bad. The wolf signifies evil. The wolf signifies temptation. The wolf signifies danger. A lot of negative things, but, we can obviously say there's a lot of other things in life that can be representative of the wolf. The pursuit of power, the pursuit of money, the pursuit, we can even get caught up in our own pursuit of happiness. While happiness is a good thing, our pursuit of it, depending on how we get there, right? It's like, oh, well, I need to load up on drugs because I feel happy when I do drugs. It's like, well, the drugs are the wolf, right? You kind of got caught up in there, but there's a lot of wolves out there, right? That want to convince us that they are a good thing. It's like, oh yeah, I'm on your side. This is right. Yeah. Let's do this together. Come with me, So the wolf is everywhere. The wolf is everywhere. And as I said before, really, like, we really do need like a Fitzjames. And from our Christian beliefs that you and I have, like, Jesus Christ is our Fitzjames, he's just kind of always there, always calm, and waiting to just jab the wolf, as if we're asking for help, he'll be right there to help us get away from the wolf, to heal us from the wolf. And so I like, and that may not have even been anything that Kelsey McIntyre was trying to accomplish, but I can see that in a very clear way, that the wolf is everywhere, but so is Christ, as long as we keep him with us, So it was, luckily Witherwill had a friend like Fitzjames, So Fitzjames was going to exist wherever he was, but luckily Witherwill had him with him, and Witherwill was ready, Fitzjames was ready to defend him. So, much like we should hopefully keep Jesus close to us, so that we can be ready for the wolf when we are blinded by our own, we'll just say, sort of ambition, for lack of better words.
Right. That we all have a Fitzjames in our life that can be Jesus, and he saves us from the wolves out there. It's true. And I like that the tale is also delivers that lesson, sort of, there are going to be wolves in sheep clothing, so to speak. They're going to flatter us, and they're going to appear as something that they are not, and offer us what we think might make us happy. But then in the end, they either fall short or, like you were saying, become just downright dangerous. And so, yeah, at that point, when we're stuck in the wolf's mouth, I think there was actually an old Latin phrase that said, I forget how it goes in Latin, but it's basically, I have the wolf by the ears. If you think about that, like being in that situation, you have a wolf by the ears. That's not a situation that you'd want to be in,
Right. Right.
But beautiful. Well, thank you, Albert. You want to wrap it up?
Sure. So I think our takeaways here are that two people should find, two people, groups of people. I think we'd like to find ways to sort of coexist in a more peaceful way. Witherwill and Fitzjames could stand to do a little improving in their friendship, and maybe after the wolf incident, maybe it did, who knows? It's a fictional story, but we can imagine, we can make it what we would like it to be. And that we have to be clear in our thoughts, and we have to be true in our thoughts, and not to dissuade anyone from having great thoughts. If you were to walk into the Sistine Chapel, and this may be a cop-out answer, right? But if you were to walk into the Sistine Chapel and you were just caught up in the grandeur of the paintings that are all over the Sistine Chapel, well, yeah, you should be, you should be at a loss of words. It should be too deep for words. That's okay. Right. That's not a bad thing, right. But if there's a huge chasm that exist in the Sistine Chapel floor and you're not paying attention, for all of the grandeur, you could still fall to your death. So
Right.
the point is like, it's not about trying to squelch people from having grand thoughts of anything that's potentially great and good, but we have to have sort of reason. We have to have control. We have to have the ability to, have a good head on our shoulders and not fall into the wolf's den. So I'd like to just imagine that we can sort of take away from this that, yeah, okay, have your thoughts, have your opinions, have your views, but not so much that you're going to end up hurting yourself or maybe others in the end. So, and I think I said in one of our other talks that about kindness. It was when we were talking about the lion and the mouse. If everyone did one act of kindness, in the world a day, how different the world would be. If we could all sort of learn to sort of respect each other and dialogue and communicate, again, I think that would be of great benefit to the world. And we all might be able to help each other avoid the wolf, like we can all sort of be Jesus to our brothers and sisters, in a way, if we allow ourselves to be open to dialogue and open to communication. So yeah, it's a great story. It really is. And I would hope that those maybe who have listened to it, maybe listen to it again and give it a time to maybe meditate upon what's going on in the story. And as Michael said in the beginning, you can go to our website, waobaudiotheater.org, and Door to Door Storytellers is where you'll find it, or should also be in our All for One stories, or you can go to our YouTube channel for We Are One Body Audio Theater and look up the two poets there. And like I said, there's one with sound effects, one without sound effects, but either way, I hope that that everyone will take a listen to it. I think it's a really enjoyable story and really another great story by Kelsey McIntyre.
Yes, go listen to it and enjoy. And hopefully our conversation has helped enhance your experience as well and pondered a little bit of the deeper meaning behind the story. And thank you, Albert, for your insights and time and chatting with me about this short story, Two Poets by Kelsey McIntyre. Thanks for joining Albert and yours truly, Michael, here today at the Table of Content. Have a good day.